It's Friday night in 1978. The drive-in sits at the edge of town, big white screen glowing against a flat, dark sky. 100 cars in quiet rows. Families, couples, kids already half asleep in back seats that nobody buckled. The air drifts in through a cracked window, popcorn, cut grass, someone's cigarette from 3 rows over. The movie runs twice because the night is long and nobody's in a hurry to end it. On the drive home, the roads belong to nobody. The radio plays something old and familiar, turned low. The smallest one is curled in the front seat with a jacket pulled up to their chin, unbuckled, completely still, completely safe in the way that only that era understood safety. You carry them inside without waking them. Lock the door. That's it. That's the whole night. 30 things about it would be illegal, unthinkable, or simply gone. And every single one of them felt like the most natural thing in the world. But embedded in all of that were 30 things real, everyday habits and realities that simply would not happen today. Some of them will make you smile, some will surprise you, and a few will make you wonder how things ever worked the way they did. This is not a list of mistakes. It's a portrait of a different time. Let's go back. 1. Smoking on airplanes. If you flew anywhere in the 1970s, you remember this. The moment you settled into your seat, the person next to you might light up, and that was perfectly legal, perfectly normal, and completely unremarkable. Airlines had designated smoking sections, but the sections were symbolic at best. Smoke doesn't respect armrests. Flight attendants carried ashtrays. The cabin had a particular smell that frequent flyers knew well, and nobody complained because almost everyone either smoked themselves or had grown up around it. The ban on domestic flights didn't come until 1988. For the entire decade of the 1970s, a transatlantic flight meant 8 hours of recycled cabin air and cigarette smoke. If you were there, you remember it like it was yesterday. If you've made it this far, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free, and we bring new videos about our country. 2. Kids outside all day, no check-ins. There was a rule in most 1970s households, and it was understood without being said: be home by dark. That was it. No texts, no check-ins, no location sharing. A child could disappear after breakfast on a Saturday and return at dinner time having covered half the neighborhood, and the response from parents was not alarm. It was, wash your hands, food's ready. Children navigated by instinct, by landmarks, by friendships formed on the fly. They resolved their own conflicts. They got lost and found their way back. That kind of independence shaped an entire generation. Whether it produced better outcomes is a conversation people still have, but as a texture of life, it was something specific that no longer exists in quite the same way. 3. No seatbelt, no problem. Cars in the 1970s were beautiful. Long hoods, chrome bumpers, bench seats wide enough to seat a family side by side, and almost nobody buckled up. Seatbelts existed. Federal law had required them in new cars since 1968, but wearing one was optional in practice and unusual in culture. Kids rode in the back with room to sprawl. Some families put a mattress in the station wagon for long trips. The front seat was for whoever called it first, regardless of age. It wasn't negligence. It was simply how things were. The data on seatbelt effectiveness was still filtering into public awareness. Laws mandating their use didn't start appearing until the mid-1980s. In the meantime, America drove with the windows down and the belts tucked behind the seat cushion. 4. Lawn darts. If your family owned a set of jarts, the full-size, metal-tipped lawn darts sold throughout the 1970s, you know exactly what this is about. These were not toys in a cautious sense of the word. They were heavy, pointed metal projectiles, roughly a foot long, designed to be thrown through the air toward a target ring on the ground. They were sold in toy stores. Children played with them unsupervised. They were a staple of backyard family gatherings for over a decade. After a series of serious injuries, they were banned by the Consumer Product Safety Commission in 1988. The metal tips are no longer legal. The ones that survive in garages and attics across America are technically collectibles. At the time, they were just Tuesday. 5. Hitchhiking as normal transportation. In the 1970s, hitchhiking was not a last resort. For millions of Americans, particularly young people, college students, and those between places, it was a legitimate, commonly used form of transportation. Drivers pulled over routinely. A thumb extended on a highway on-ramp carried social weight it simply doesn't carry today. There were informal codes. You didn't take rides after dark alone. You read the situation before getting in. But the practice itself was woven into the culture. It appeared in songs, movies, coming-of-age stories. It was how a lot of people got from one chapter of their life to the next. The combination of changing safety, culture, and media coverage gradually made it uncommon. Today, it is rare enough to feel notable. In 1975, it was just how some people traveled. 6. Shopping malls as the center of the universe. Before the internet, before Amazon, before streaming and delivery and infinite digital distraction, there was the mall. And in the 1970s, the American shopping mall was not just a place to buy things. It was a social institution, a destination. The place where teenagers went on weekends with no particular purpose except to be there. Where families spent Saturday afternoons. Where you ran into your neighbors and made plans and killed time in a way that felt genuinely pleasurable. The anchor stores. The food courts just starting to appear. The particular echo of foot traffic on terrazzo floors. The sense that everything you needed practically and socially was under one roof. Many of those malls are gone now, or going. But for people who grew up in that era, the mall carries a warmth that goes beyond retail. It was where life happened. 7. Lead paint in your home, and nobody knew. Throughout most of American history, and well into the 1970s, lead-based paint was standard in homes. It produced vibrant, durable colors. It was in the walls, on the windowsills, on the porches of millions of houses across the country. The health implications were not widely understood at the consumer level. The federal government banned lead paint for residential use in 1978. For everyone who grew up in an older home before that, and for the families who continued living in those homes for years after, the exposure was simply part of the environment, invisible, unremarkable. Part of the background of ordinary life. 8. Drinking and driving a different legal reality. The social norms around drinking and driving in the 1970s were fundamentally different from today, not just in behavior and law, in enforcement, and in widespread cultural attitude. Drunk driving arrests were less common. BAC limits varied by state. The phrase, "I'll be fine after a few drinks at a party," was said with a confidence the data didn't support. Mad Mothers Against Drunk Driving was founded in 1980. Before that organizing shift, the legal and cultural pressure was simply lighter. The consequences were real, but the consensus that it was unacceptable hadn't fully formed yet. A lot has changed, and the roads are safer for it. 9. Kids in the front seat. In the 1970s, there was no such thing as a car seat requirement for older children, and infants were often held in a parent's arms or placed in simple basket-style seats that provided minimal protection. A child sitting in the front passenger seat was not unusual. A toddler on a parent's lap during a short drive was common in rural areas. The airbag, which would eventually make the front seat dangerous for children even with a belt, wasn't standard equipment until years later. Modern car seat laws, which now govern children up to certain heights and weights with specific equipment requirements, would be unrecognizable to most 1970s parents. At the time, the lap was considered protection enough. 10. Unsupervised neighborhood pools and playgrounds. Public pools in many communities were casual, loosely supervised environments in the 1970s. Lifeguards existed, but the ratio of staff to swimmers was different. Community pools were places kids went alone, stayed all day, bought a candy bar from the vending machine, and came home sunburned without anyone filing a report. Playground equipment was similarly unencumbered. Metal slides that reached genuine heights, merry-go-rounds that required real grip strength, jungle gyms with spacing wide enough to fall through. The surface underneath was usually asphalt or packed dirt. The move toward rubberized surfaces, lower equipment, and closer supervision came gradually. But the childhood experience of those playgrounds, the specific physics of a metal merry-go-round at full speed, belonged to that era and not many others. 11. Party lines. Shared phone lines with neighbors. In rural America, well into the 1970s, a party line was a telephone line shared by multiple households in a neighborhood. If your neighbor was on the phone, you waited. If you picked up and heard voices, you gently placed the receiver back down. Occasionally, you didn't and heard things you weren't meant to. Privacy was structural, only in the sense that decency created it. The line itself was shared. Party lines were being phased out through the decade as telephone infrastructure modernized. But for millions of Americans in small towns and farming communities, the shared line was just how communication worked. It created an accidental intimacy between neighbors that has no modern equivalent. 12. Cigarette vending machines everywhere. Walk into a diner, a bowling alley, a hotel lobby, or a bar in the 1970s, and somewhere near the entrance there was almost certainly a cigarette vending machine. No ID check. No age verification. You put your coins in, pulled the knob, and a pack dropped into the tray. Simple as buying a soda. These machines were ubiquitous in restaurants, hospitals, even some school buildings in the early part of the decade. The concept of restricting tobacco access by age existed in law but was not meaningfully enforced at the point of purchase. Cigarette vending machines weren't fully regulated out of public spaces until the 1990s. For the entire 1970s, they were furniture. 13. Doctor visits with no paperwork. If you saw a doctor in the 1970s, you remember how fast it moved. You came in, waited briefly, saw the physician, received advice or a prescription, and left. The experience had a directness to it, a human transaction between a patient and a doctor with relatively little administrative structure around it. There was no HIPAA, no 17 pages of intake forms, no electronic health record to populate. The doctor often kept notes in handwriting in a paper file with your name on a tab. Healthcare itself was simpler in some ways and more limited in others. But the texture of a routine appointment, the speed of it, the directness of it, felt different in a way that many people who lived through it still remember fondly. 14. Television sign-off at midnight. If you stayed up late enough in the 1970s, you saw it. The programming would end usually with a sign-off message, the national anthem, and then a test pattern filling the screen. Static. Nothing. Until morning programming began. There was no 24-hour news, no overnight streaming, no content available on demand at 3 in the morning. The television day had a beginning and an end, and that end was final. The stillness of a house after the TV signed off had a particular quality that is hard to describe and impossible to replicate. Cable television changed this gradually, but for most of the 1970s, the screen going dark was a natural signal. Time to sleep. 15. The thumb, hitchhiking's universal language. In the 1970s, extending your thumb on a roadside was a universally understood, socially legible signal. Drivers knew what it meant. The person doing it understood the informal contract. There were customs around it, how to position yourself, what roads were acceptable, the unspoken negotiation of eye contact when a car slowed down. It was a language, a physical communication system that required no infrastructure. And for a generation of Americans, hitchhiking wasn't just transportation, it was identity. You'd hear someone say, "I hitchhiked from Ohio to California when I was 22, the way someone today might describe a gap year abroad. It was connected to a specific idea of freedom, that the country was open, that strangers could be trusted, that getting somewhere on nothing but your thumb was proof of something. In 1973, it was just asking for a ride. 16. Backyard burning. In many towns and suburbs across America in the 1970s, burning your trash in the backyard was a routine household chore. Leaves, paper waste, household garbage into a metal barrel or a simple pit, and lit. Neighbors did it. Grandparents did it. It was part of the weekly rhythm of keeping a home. The Clean Air Act of 1970 began the process of changing this, and local ordinances gradually tightened throughout the decade. But in many rural and suburban communities, backyard burning continued well into the 1980s. The smell of it, a particular kind of smoke from mixed materials, is one of those sensory memories that immediately transports people of a certain age. 17. Baby oil instead of sunscreen. The science of sun damage was not well understood at the consumer level in the 1970s. Tanning was considered healthy. A deep tan signaled time outdoors, vitality, vacation. The product many people used to maximize it was baby oil, which does not block UV rays. It concentrates them. SPF sunscreen existed but was not widely used outside of medical contexts. The idea that sun exposure needed to be limited or blocked was not part of mainstream beauty or health culture. The dermatological consequences of a decade of baby oil summers are, for many people, still visible, but at the time, it just looked like summer. 18. Buying land on a handshake. Real estate transactions in the 1970s, particularly in rural areas, could be remarkably informal. A handshake, a verbal agreement, a simple one-page document, and land changed hands. Long-standing relationships between neighbors meant that legal formalization sometimes came after, or not at all. The layers of documentation, title searches, escrow accounts, and legal review that define modern property transactions were far less universal. In tight-knit communities where everyone knew everyone, a person's word carried legal weight it no longer does, not because people were naive, but because the community itself was the enforcement mechanism. 19. Drive-in movie theaters. In the 1970s, the drive-in was not a novelty. It was one of the primary ways Americans watched movies. You pulled in. You attached the speaker to your window. Families stretched across the bench seat or arranged themselves in the truck bed with blankets. Double features ran back to back. Concession stands served popcorn and hot dogs. It was communal in a specific way, private in your car, but surrounded by hundreds of other cars doing exactly the same thing. That combination of solitude and shared experience had its own feeling. The number of drive-ins peaked in the late 1950s, but thousands still operated throughout the 1970s. Today, fewer than 300 remain in the entire country. 20. Asbestos in ordinary buildings. Asbestos was used extensively in construction through most of the 20th century, in insulation, floor tiles, ceiling tiles, pipe wrap, and wall materials. Many of the schools, office buildings, and homes built before the mid-1970s contained it. The health implications were known in industrial circles earlier than they became public knowledge. Regulation began building through the decade. But for most people living and working in those buildings, the presence of asbestos was simply unknown. It was in the walls. It was part of the infrastructure. It was just Tuesday. 21. The warning label nobody read. Diet culture existed in the 1970s, and Tab, the original Diet Cola, was its fizzy ambassador. Tab was sweetened with saccharin, which by 1977 carried a federally required warning label after studies linked it to cancer in lab animals. The warning was placed on the can. People read it, shrugged, and kept drinking Tab. It says something specific about the era that a cancer warning on a beverage was processed as mildly interesting information rather than cause for alarm. The relationship between consumer information and consumer behavior was different, more relaxed, more trusting of individual judgment, less amplified by the kind of public health communication we have today. 22. The milkman. Many American households in the early 1970s still received milk delivery at home. A truck came before dawn. Glass bottles were left at the door. Empty bottles were placed outside to be collected and refilled. It was a closed-loop system, entirely local, that had been running for generations. The milkman knew your family. He knew if you'd been on vacation because the bottles hadn't been collected. He was part of the informal social infrastructure of a neighborhood. By the mid-1970s, supermarket distribution had largely replaced home delivery in most cities, but the tail end of that era, the last years of the morning bottles on the stoop, belonged to the early part of the decade. 23. Long-distance calls as a big deal. In the 1970s, calling someone in another state was an event. Long-distance rates were high. Many families reserved those calls for specific occasions, holidays, emergencies, Sunday evenings when rates dropped. The call itself was planned. You thought about what you were going to say. The minutes felt significant. Children were told not to stay on too long. The bill came at the end of the month, itemized by each call, and parents reviewed it. A lengthy, long-distance conversation was an expense that needed justification. Today, communication is effectively free and unlimited. The particular weight that a long-distance call once carried has no equivalent in modern life. 24. Paying cash for almost everything. Credit cards existed in the 1970s, but they were not universal. Not everyone had one. Not every merchant accepted them, and many families operated almost entirely in cash. The grocery store, the hardware store, the doctor's office, the gas station. Cash in hand, change returned, transaction done. There was no digital record, no itemized statement, no data trail. The financial texture of daily life was physical folded bills, loose change in a jar, an envelope for each budget category. People knew exactly how much they had because they could feel it. 25. The ice cream truck. The ice cream truck in the 1970s was not a scheduled, tracked, or supervised event. A bell, or a tinny jingle, heard from wherever you were, and you ran. You ran without telling anyone where you were going. You crossed the street without asking. You handed money to a stranger through a window, got your creamsicle, and ran back. This happened thousands of times, in thousands of neighborhoods, every summer. It was a completely normal transaction between children and an adult unknown to their parents. The entire system operated on the reasonable assumption that things would be fine, and mostly they were. 26. Smoking in grocery stores and hospitals. The airplane gets the most attention, but indoor smoking in the 1970s was genuinely everywhere. Grocery stores, hospital lobbies, sometimes even rooms, government offices, libraries, movie theaters. You could be standing in a checkout line while the person ahead of you smoked. You could be waiting for an appointment in a medical building filling with secondhand smoke. The idea that certain spaces would be entirely smoke-free was not yet part of the social architecture. It came later, gradually, one ordinance and one state law at a time. But during the 1970s, the air in almost any enclosed public space contained smoke. That was simply the baseline. 27. School lunch. How it actually was. School cafeterias in the 1970s operated with a simplicity that nutritionists would find hard to defend today. Meals were often prepared from scratch on site, which was genuine. But they were also high in sodium, starch-heavy, and served without regard for allergen labeling, dietary restrictions, or caloric balance. The concept of a nut-free school did not exist. Peanut butter appeared regularly. There were no ingredient disclosures. A child with a food allergy navigated through instinct and parental instruction, not institutional accommodation. The food itself was often genuinely good, in a simple, filling way. But the infrastructure around safety and nutrition looked nothing like what schools manage today. 28. Fireworks, the real kind. In many states throughout the 1970s, the fireworks available to ordinary consumers were significantly more powerful than what is legally sold today. M80s, cherry bombs, bottle rockets with actual lift and trajectory, available at roadside stands, in small towns, from vendors who asked no questions. The 4th of July, in a 1970s neighborhood, was loud in a way that is hard to recreate legally today. The burn marks on summer driveways, the specific smell of sulfur on a July evening. Emergency rooms saw the consequences, which eventually drove tighter regulation. But for the people who lived it, the particular feeling of a real firework in your hand, purchased by a 10-year-old with birthday money, it was the clearest possible signal that summer had arrived. 29. Television with only 3 channels. Instead of endless options, most households in the 1970s had access to just 3 television networks: ABC, NBC, and CBS. That was it. No cable. No remote control in most homes for most of the decade. You walked to the set, turned the dial, and watched what was on. That meant fewer choices, but shared experiences. When something aired, a large part of the country watched it together. The next morning at school or at work, everyone had seen the same thing. There was no algorithm deciding what you watched next. There was just whatever came on after. 30. The rotary phone. To close this list, the rotary phone. Not because it's obscure, most people know what it is, but because using one daily shapes something about the relationship between effort and communication. To dial a number, you placed your finger in a hole, rotated the dial to the stop, waited for it to return, and repeated. For a number with several 8s and 9s, the process took genuine time. If you dialed wrong, you started over. Wrong numbers happened frequently. You redialed with patience. The call connected or it didn't, and if it didn't, you tried again later. There was no texting, no immediate callback. Communication required a small but real investment of attention. And in that investment, in that brief moment of physical engagement, before a voice came on the line, there was a presence to connection that faster technologies slowly replaced. 30 things. Some of them feel like a different world. Some of them feel like last week. The 1970s weren't a simpler time, they were a different time. With their own pressures, their own rhythms, and their own version of what it meant to live a normal life in America. What's clear, looking back, is that a lot of what felt permanent turned out to be temporary, and a lot of what felt unremarkable turned out to be worth remembering. If you were there, if any of this brought something back, tell us in the comments. A smell, a sound, a specific Saturday afternoon that one of these just dropped back into your memory. That's exactly why we make these. America Decoded posts every week. Subscribe if you want to keep seeing this kind of storytelling. It's free, and the next one is already in the works.